Hello and welcome back to the Leadership Link. My name is Chris Blakey. I'm one of the co-founders of the Developer Link, which is a software engineering recruitment company that finds engineers for companies globally. And this is the Leadership Link, built for new, aspiring, and experienced engineering leaders looking to kind of level up their experience and get some advice from some of the greatest out there, and people trying to also kind of play in that same market as well. So today I've got Alex. He's director of software over at Infineon, and he's a leadership and career coach as well. And first came across yourself on LinkedIn, Alex. You're very noticeable on there. It seems to be posting a lot of content. So thanks for coming on. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing very well. Thank you, Chris, for having me.
Yeah. So
Um,
tell me a little bit about your background.
yeah, so I graduated with a Bachelor of Software Engineering from the University of Waterloo in Canada. And after graduation, I moved to Southern California, where I worked for Qualcomm for 11 years. I started off as an embedded software engineer, and then after about 7 years, I transitioned to a technical lead role, where I spent another 4 years. And then about 5 years ago, I moved to Munich, Germany, where I bounced around the startup scenes here in Munich. I led teams on various products such as smart glasses, food recognition, and autonomous driving
Oh
verification.
wow, some pretty cool projects.
Yeah. And then about 3 years ago now, I got a job at Infineon, which is a large semiconductor manufacturer. So we have about 50,000 people. And here at Infineon, I'll lead a team called the Software Center of Competence, where my team is essentially responsible for overseeing the software activities of 200 software developers with the overarching goal of improving quality and throughput. So we deal with topics like CI/CD and full stack development and embedded development, process and project management, things like that.
Oh, and I guess aside from that, how did you get into being a career coach? I mean, you would have thought one full time job would be enough. Like, what made you want to kind of be a career coach as well?
Yeah, so my favorite part about leadership and leading teams has always been helping people grow. That has been the most fulfilling aspect for me personally. So while there is aspects of that in my full-time job, I really wanted to pursue that independently as well because it's just something that I genuinely enjoy. I've gone through quite a bit of a journey myself. From being an engineer to a tech lead, team lead to now a director, and I've had some difficult experiences with getting laid off, getting fired, dealing with difficult situations at work, and I enjoy helping people grow, and if they're going through similar situations, help them with that as well. So now what I primarily do is I help people land jobs. Right.
For
So
sure.
I've in the last 5 6 years I've done a lot of interviewing. I've been on both sides of the table many times, um, and so it's just something that I feel like I can provide value to people, and just something that I find extremely fulfilling.
For sure. And has it always been like engineering leaders that you've kind of mentored, or is that something that more recently you've kind of focused on?
It's been a variety of people. So I've mentored juniors and mid levels, and also engineering leaders, and also people that want to get into engineering leadership, to transition from an individual contributor to leadership. And that's kind of my personal favorite aspect to help people with, to coach, to guide them. So lately, I've been focusing on that.
Yeah,
But I
for
also have
sure.
some clients which are not in engineering at all as well,
Oh,
which has
really?
been pretty
What?
interesting.
Still kind of management or?
Um, Yeah, in a way, yeah,
Yeah.
leadership as well, but just general career difficulties and trying to overcome hurdles, and because there's a lot of common topics between engineering leadership and leadership in other sectors as well.
Yeah,
So
for
yeah.
sure. And
Mhm.
that's one of the biggest reasons I started this podcast was I didn't see a huge amount out there for like new engineering leaders. And I think people all of a sudden go from being a great engineer to you're now a manager, like make all of these people great engineers as well. And there's no there's no real coaching behind it in a lot of companies, and particularly when people are the first manager in a company. And also, I think one thing that you mentioned there is when people are interviewing for, say for example, there's no room for them to go up in their current role and they're interviewing for a team lead role, like actually getting under the hood of what people are assessing from like a soft skill perspective must be quite different to all of the, say for example you've just done technical interviews in the past, all of a sudden going into a management interview, it must be a very different different interview, like and much more sort of soft skills.
Yeah, absolutely. So that transition, like you touched upon it, that there's really not much available out there to facilitate that transition, right? To go from an individual contributor to a tech lead. Um, I've actually developed the tech lead training that I'm now doing at my company for this
Oh,
exact
cool.
reason, because I saw this gap. So this has been a topic that's been pretty close to my heart. And as to your second point about the expectations, right? So when in an interview, you used to technical interviews, now all of a sudden you're applying as a some sort of a tech lead, team lead, like you said, there's people leadership responsibilities. And it's going to be a different interview because the role, it's a different role. The expectations are different. The biggest difference is what you're responsible for. So, as an individual contributor, as a developer, you're primarily responsible for your code, essentially, right? Your features, the solutions that you output. This is more or less under your control. As a tech lead or a team lead, you're fully responsible for all of your team's deliverables. So your definition of success is different. Your definition of success is my team delivers versus I deliver, right? And this has a lot more to do with uh, getting people on board, right? Asserting your influence, right? Getting people to actually listen to you. You you cannot control everything as a team lead, right? Whereas an individual contributor, you have full control over your code, over your
Yeah.
feature development. As a team lead, you cannot ensure that everything is being done right. So, there's a certain element of trust that you need to establish. And I mean, there's a whole load of factors there.
Yeah.
So, in that sense, you're doing a lot less implementing, a lot more coordinating, a lot more facilitating than you would as an individual contributor.
For sure. And we kind of touched on it there, but like just break down for me what exactly, like you said, you're kind of using interchangeably like tech lead, team lead, but like that first management role, like what exactly is the tech lead role? Like what are your responsibilities as a tech lead?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, generally, your natural, like let's say the natural engineering career progression path, right? You go from, let's say, a junior engineer to a senior engineer, maybe staff, and then you kind of go to this tech lead, and then you generally go to like engineering manager, and then director, and they're all different roles. Now, the difference between all these roles, let's say as an engineer, if you're like a senior staff engineer, the difference is scope, right? So the your topics of scope as an engineer are mainly technical, right? As you transition to a tech lead, you have a mix of people and technical topics. And as you go to engineering manager and director, it more becomes towards more t- towards people and strategy, right? So as a tech lead, you have this mixed responsibility of people and technical topics. And the setup well, the reason I use them interchangeably is because it really differs on org to org and company to company what your
Yeah,
specific roles and responsibilities are. But generally, your first leadership role, I mean, you will have these things in common, is that you will be fully responsible for your team's technical deliverables, right? That's one thing they have in common. And generally, you will be the main interface to your team. Um, you will need to interface with various stakeholders, product owners, and management and customers. Um, you will also need to facilitate the decision making in your team. And so these are really the yeah, and you're gonna have to also take the business into account, right? So you really have to understand how the company works, not just from a technical perspective, but what's important to the customer, what's important for revenue, and so forth.
for sure.
So this is
So
the
it's
yeah.
so it's a lot more than just doing your own job and just checking that a couple of other engineers are kind of like okay from like a personal perspective. It's more making sure that the team as a whole kind of delivers, right?
Yeah, absolutely, right. And I mean, the major technical decisions that are made on the team, they have to, or they should align with the business, right? So as a tech lead, you need to bring in that external perspective, right? So, because as an engineer, right, I just want to make the most perfect code possible, right? I want to make the coolest features, the coolest design principles, use the latest tech, and so forth, right? But I mean, here's the thing: the customer doesn't care about your clean code, right? They don't care how you do it. And so you need to balance these aspects of like, okay, this is what I need for the business, this is customer requirements, and this is essentially our tech debt, right? This is what makes sense technically to achieve what we need to achieve given the requirements.
Okay, that makes sense. And I guess what skills do you really need apart from obviously being good technically, because you're still going to be pretty hands on at this case, but like let's say that that's a given. Like, what additional skills do you need to be able to excel as a team lead, tech lead?
Mhm. So, from a technical point of view, I know you said like it's kind of a given, but I think it's also important to understand the type of technical skills that you need. So, if you think, the T model, right? Um, it's a lot more beneficial to be wider in your skill set than deeper, right? So I'm talking about like general software engineering competence, good practices, right? Understanding the processes, the methodologies, architectural decisions, these kinds of general topics. It's not as important to be a domain expert unless you're leading like a very technically focused team. Like if you're doing, I don't know, compiler optimizations or generative AI or 3D programming, right? Where it's like really technically focused. But if you're leading like a cross-functional team that's delivering some sort of product, it's you don't necessarily need to be an expert in everything that your team does. You absolutely need to understand it, but it's more important to just have that general software engineering competency. The other skills that you need, well, definitely people leadership, right? Um, most of the topics that you'll deal with will have to do with people, right? So you're gonna have to get your team. You're gonna have to lead your team, right? You will need to influence your team, and in order to influence, you need to somehow establish your power to influence. You will need to interact with various stakeholders, right? Because you will be the interface of your team. So dealing with people and being emotionally mature about situations, because you will face uh, quite a bit of adversity. There's going to be a lot of different situations, whether it's you know um, fixing a crucial production bug or dealing with a developer that's pissed off because the guy next to him has a mechanical keyboard and he can't concentrate. And everything in between. So it's important to kind of stay even and hold the course, so to speak, not to react too much to every situation. So when you deal with people, it's just more unpredictable. So you have to
Yeah,
have a certain level of emotional maturity. And the other aspect, you can think of as like business acumen, strategy. So like we talked about earlier, you need to understand the business requirements, and you need to translate that to your team and make the best decisions that you can, for technical implementation, to ensure that they translate to revenue or business success.
For sure. I mean, yeah, that's three quite sort of broad areas, I guess, isn't it? I guess first from like a technical point of view, like you could, for example, have come from a very front end heavy role or a very back end heavy role or anything like that, and want to become like a manager, an opportunity arises or something like that. Like, what's the best way to like increase that like breadth? Because obviously the majority of people, they, like you said, they kind of T-shape because that's where the majority of organizations want them to be. They want them to be a specialist in something and kind of know a bit of everything. Like, when's the right time to do that? Is it like when you're in the management role, or do you kind of need to start increasing that breadth of technical knowledge before you were to start applying and looking at these types of roles?
Yeah, I would recommend definitely to increase that breadth before you get into these kinds of roles, right? And you can already start doing this in your current role. You can start building bridges with other teams, trying to understand uh, the other technologies that you're dealing with. Like if you're a front end developer, try to better understand the back end solutions. Try to understand where the gaps are, right? Try to understand the touch points, the interfaces, the opportunities. And it's not just technical teams, right? You can reach out to sales, to marketing, try to understand their world and do your best to understand how their world translates to your world, essentially, right? So, one of the main responsibilities of a tech lead is essentially to act as a translator between all these different teams as the interface to the technical team, right?
Yeah.
And so basically look for opportunities to expand your scope, right? Scope is the main differentiator between, let's say, an engineer and a tech lead, right?
Yeah. And then I think the same can be said for the last point that you made about the business acumen as well, right? Like going from working on, I've been told to do this, or we're doing this like in this language, like because of this, like to actually thinking like why, like who's going to be using it, like what's the actual business case for what I'm working on, like and I guess that's the same as you said, thinking about other teams and how they interact with your department, thinking about how the customer actually interacts with what you're working on.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I like to think of this as, let's say, extreme ownership or end-to-end ownership, right? So if you can demonstrate that you can deliver a feature, a solution, taking all of that into account, right? That's really owning it and showing that you can deliver. And that's essentially what a tech lead needs to do.
For sure. And then yeah, the other point that you made about sort of like people management and stuff like that, like there's I find the biggest thing for myself personally is like prioritization of like when I first became a manager, like every problem that anyone had at any time, I was like, right, I am your manager, so therefore this is now my problem. Whereas like I think the biggest thing is like you said, like something being down on a huge production issue versus like someone being annoying or like they're very very different ends of the spectrum, but like there's that whole quadrant, I can't remember who it's by, of like important and urgent, right? And like only dealing with stuff that's urgent and important in the moment and putting stuff off until later. And I spoke to Gregor on the previous episode about sort of blocking time where you're not able to respond to things that aren't urgent and things like that. And I think that's the biggest thing from a people management perspective is setting boundaries and then like working to prioritize stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, setting boundaries for yourself and expectations from your team is a huge part of it. Like you said correctly, every problem that happens within the team, within your product, is your problem. Like you own that. You are fully responsible for it. Now, like I said, as an IC, as an individual contributor, like you have full control over your problems, over your bugs and so forth, right? But here you will burn out if you try to control everything and get a handle of everything. So delegation, effective delegation is a very important skill to develop, right? You need to empower your team to deal with these issues, as best they can and as best, and you need to facilitate that, guide them also as best as you can if they need it. So letting go of the control is a huge part of it. It's a big mindset shift for a lot of people, right? And that plays into the whole people leadership role of trust, mutual trust, having psychological safety, allowing for people to fail, allowing for mistakes, just creating that kind of environment where people can feel let's say, the freedom to do what they need to do in the way they need to do it best. And they also understand why they're doing it. It's also an important component. So if you essentially set a foundation within your team where everyone's on the same page as far as this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, these are our values of like what's important for us, like, I don't know, like quality, uptime, all these kinds of things. And then it makes delegation and resolution of issues clear, especially if you define like clear roles and responsibilities and things like that. The other challenging aspect here is for a team, for a tech lead, a lot of your issues are not going to be scoped. They're going to be fuzzy, right? Like, again, as a developer, you have a bug, you have a feature to develop. There's a clear beginning and end and a clear definition of done. With tech lead topics, when it comes to people, when it comes to stakeholder management, when it comes to direction, roadmap, strategy, these are not very well defined topics. And if you're not careful, they can drive you pretty crazy because you tend to take those topics home with them because there's not a natural conclusion.
Yeah.
Right? So it's definitely something to be mindful of.
For sure. And I think one of the biggest things as well, obviously technically there when you're working on like a project, there's multiple ways to be able to reach the same goal, but like it's pretty easy to make a decision, right? Whereas I feel like particularly when you're responsible for getting this team to deliver this thing, like you said, there's probably 100 different ways that you could delegate the tasks and make that team deliver that thing. And like you said, you could spend like probably half of the entire amount of time deciding what to do before actually implementing it. One of my favorite things was like I read something recently. It was if it can be reversed, make decisions quickly. If it can't be reversed, make decisions slowly. Because I think I get myself bogged down sometimes. I spend some like more time thinking about how I'm going to do things sometimes than it actually takes me to do the thing. And it might be like a 5-minute email, and I might think about it all day because it's an important email. Whereas I could just take 15 minutes, sit there, like write that email and it'd be done. But I spend so much of my time thinking about how I'm going to do things. And I think a lot of that is because there's so many different choices and it's completely up to you, like how you do it because it's your team. And like you said, all of them are your problems.
Yeah. So one thing I've learned, I mean, it's an excellent point. One thing I've learned is that there's a lot of value in making a decision fast, whether it's right or wrong. It's just better to make a decision, see it out, and then adjust pivot if necessary, right? Because if you try to nail down all the elements, all the factors, get into that perfectionist mindset of I have to make sure that, everything is correct and well thought out, and you're going to be too slow and you're not going to get it right anyway. So it's just, it pays to be decisive, right? And it also pays to go with your gut in a sense. You move a lot quicker if you make the decision, even if it's a wrong one. So it's just that habit of getting into that habit, into that mindset of, okay, this is the problem. We can wait around and debate and draw diagrams and have meetings and workshops, or we can make a decision and get this thing moving and iterate.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And like you said, like there's normally like, I don't know, 3 to 5 ways that you could do something. They're all like correct. There might be a slightly better one, but like they're all like correct ways of doing it and like things that will work. And like you said, you're better off to just do one of them rather than weigh up the pros and cons of every single one for the first for the first week before making a decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a tech lead, right? I mean, depending on the decision, sometimes you need to make the decision together with a team, right? Especially if it's a technical direction or let's say technical solution, like, hey, do we use this tech stack or this tech stack? Which architecture do we use? Right? Like you don't need to necessarily be the one that makes that decision, but you need to facilitate the decision making process and you need to own the decision and then hold your team accountable to that decision. Right?
Yeah.
So if we all get together and we kind of agree that okay, this tech stack A is the best way to go, even if some people disagree, um, it's up to you to get them on board, to own that, and to hold the team accountable for it.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like there's a difference between, like you said, you kind of all want to be pulling together in the same direction. That makes things so much easier. But there's a difference between like putting it out to everyone on the team and being like, hey, like, what do you think we should do? Versus being like, I've looked at this. I think maybe we should go with like A, B, or C. Like, would like to get your thoughts and coming together. And like you said, the majority of people picking C and being like, cool. So we agreed, we're going with C. Whereas I find that's the easiest way to actually get constructive stuff with our team. Like we do a lot. Even when we did our website, we got everyone in, and like our design agency came in and got everyone to feel for everything. And like we take a lot of input, but we have been guilty in the past of being like, what does everyone want to do? And you just get so much input from everyone else that we're like, oh god, we need to rein this back a little bit. So I feel like almost like pre-decision making and narrowing things down before giving those things to the team can really help.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance. I mean, you do want to, in a sense, get everyone's input on the decision. Let's say preparing options is also a good way to let's say make everyone feel heard. Sometimes, well, I feel as a tech lead, right? Like you're essentially responsible for the decision, whatever it is. So you first of all, like you need to buy into it, right? You need to be convinced that this is the right decision because like you own it, you're gonna have to live with it. So even if sometimes it's not a popular decision, right? And you strongly believe like, no, guys, we really need to go this way. That is your responsibility, right? Um, so I think it's important to get everyone's input. It's important to make sure that everybody feels heard and that if they have concerns, you address them, right? Um, Now, the solution doesn't have to come from you. But like I said, you need to own the decision. You need to be convinced by it, and you need to bring people on board that are not convinced by it. And that's where, defining a bigger picture target, bigger picture goals, this is what we're doing, why we're doing, how we're doing. It needs to fit into that. Those are your like um, these are kind of like your boundaries, your scope within your framework within your making such decision. So it also helps if everyone understands and aligns on that, the big picture, then you can scope it. You can scope the solution and decision in the frame of that. But yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one, right? If you democratize it, it can also be a slippery slope if you just don't feel like it's the right way to go.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess we've touched on a couple of them, but what are some of the other sort of biggest challenges when actually leading software teams?
Well, there's so many, and I think we've touched on quite a lot of them. Um, but yeah, I think that that unpredictability and the lack of fuzzy requirements. As engineers, we want everything to fit nicely in a box, right? We want clear requirements. We want closure, right? Everything nicely defined, and this just doesn't happen. Like I said, with these various topics, because a lot of your topics are going to be dealing with people dealing with strategy, dealing with business, trying to balance all of that, right? Dealing with various personalities is probably one of the most challenging one. So,
Yeah.
as an engineer, you primarily deal with your computer, right? Yes, you talk with your team, you talk with some stakeholders, with some testers, but as a tech lead, you deal with your team. You get to know every person on your team, relatively intimately to an extent. You need to interface with probably other technical teams, the sales team, the marketing, the product owner, the management, maybe even the customers. And everybody brings their own perspective into it. They bring their own personality to, it's a different world in marketing than it is in software development. So just try to understand, emphasize with each, let's say, different team, different personality, and just try to make sense of all of that with all the fuzzy requirements, bringing it all together, trying to
Yeah,
balance all those things to do the best you can is probably the biggest challenge.
for sure.
And like I
And
said, it's a quite a different role from
yeah,
like a senior or a staff engineer, and that
and
transition is challenging.
and do you think the fuzziness of the role is one of the main reasons why developers find it difficult to transition into leadership?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there's a few elements here. It depends. Because typically what happens is you have a very talented engineer, like a rock star, and they're very good at delivering the solutions and writing excellent code. So what naturally happens is like, hey, you're really good at what you do. You're really good at developing code. Let's make you lead a team full of developers so they can be really good at developing code as well, right? But it's a like we said, it's a different role with different responsibilities and different expectations. And it's a different skill set. And what worked for you as an engineer may not work for you as a tech lead. Now, you also need to consider what are the motivations of that person who wants to transition to a tech lead. Because I think a lot of people, they don't really quite, what I've seen, they don't really quite understand what it is they're getting themselves into, what the role is. Now, it's a natural progression, right, of the engineering career path, as we've talked about. It's a natural step towards leadership and the C-suite. But it's just a different role, and you have to deal with different topics and different and lots of people topics, which in my experience, a lot of people don't generally want to deal with it, but they kind of go into it because it's best for their career. So this is one of the challenges here. It's not necessarily a promotion. It's really a different career track. Let's put it that way, right? And we've also touched upon this earlier, but there's really nothing to prepare you for it. I mean, there's leadership training that some corporations have, which do give you some groundwork on how to deal with people, how to lead people. But the specific scope of a tech lead, like you're on a level above implementation and you own certain things like processes and definition of done and quality criteria and what is the CI strategy and things like that. So understanding like what you actually own, what to let go of, how to interface with different stakeholders. I mean, it's a very specific role in the software industry, and there's really no training to prepare you for that. So you just kind of have to figure it out as
Yeah,
you go.
for sure. It's really similar to like the recruitment and the sales world in general. Like people just do well, and they're all of a sudden they're good. Like if we just make them a manager, like they'll make everyone under them good. And it's weird because like you only know the management styles that you've had or that have worked like on you, and then all of a sudden you're given a team and you just manage them in exactly the same way that you were managed, and you might have people that are completely different to you, and like that management style isn't going to work, and that management style might not have even been great for you. It's just the only one that you know from your current manager. So you have a team of people and you manage them in the same way that you were managed, and it just doesn't quite gel. And there is that transition as well. I'm sure it's the same here as they're still expecting you to do your day job, and they're expecting you to get the same performance out of other people as they are out of you. And it's just a real, like, the transition period, like that kind of player coach bit, I think is the hardest bit
Yeah, that's absolutely challenging.
for sure.
As a I think you mentioned something at the beginning. I wanted to touch upon that. Um, right, the different management style, right? So yeah, you're not really trained, and you kind of go with what you know. But the expectation may be, like, if you didn't really look into it, is that hey, your team needs to adapt to you, right? So this is like my style, and maybe I'm what served me well as a developer, like I don't know, being stubborn or being persistent, which has really helped me grow. Now I'm taking that into my leadership role, and not everyone's going to be on board with that, right? So you're going to deal with many different personalities, and people thrive in different environments, in different situations, right? Everybody's different. So it's really up to you to adapt to your team and not the other way around. And you need to understand that, right? Because otherwise, yeah, you're going to have to just hire a lot of people that are similar to yourselves, which isn't always the most conductive thing to a team. And with software development team, like software development is a creative art, right? Like you come up with creative solutions to very challenging problems. So the mindset that each person has is very important. And in order for them to be at their best, they have to feel comfortable. They have to feel like they can be creative, like they can express themselves, right? Like they have the freedom to make mistakes in a sense, right? Because that will breed that creativity and that kind of like the necessary solutions that you need. But it's different for everybody, right? And you need to adapt to your team.
Yeah, for sure.
And yeah, and like you mentioned, balancing those demands between your tasks, like you may still have technical tasks, but you still need to lead your team, and trying to balance both of those, yeah, can be challenging.
Yeah, and the way to, like you said, it's a creative job, and the best way you could possibly have your team is to have people that think in a different way to you under you, so that you can think of things from multiple different angles and get the best solution, and think of things that you wouldn't necessarily think of. But to do that, you have to hire people that aren't the same as you, and therefore aren't going to be want to be managed in the way that you want to be managed. Like, some people might need to be spoken to like once an hour or once every couple of hours to check that they're on track. And some people actually really like that, whereas some people would recoil at the idea of someone micromanaging them and everything like that. Whereas some people need, right, every few hours we'll check in, see where you've got to, like, and want that update, and trying to work out like what each different person needs, I feel like is one of the hardest parts. And I guess off the back of that, what would you say are the main traits that are the difference between being a good tech lead versus a bad tech lead?
Yeah, so a good tech lead would basically establishes this kind of environment where each person can be at their best. So that means, they build relationships with each person, and they create an environment of psychological safety, of trust, maybe like no blame culture. Make sure that every voice gets heard, does not shut people down, right? Is not like stubborn in their decision, saying like, "Oh, this is my decision," and end of discussion, right? Obviously, also doesn't micromanage. This is, I mean, I know some people may prefer those regular check-ins, but in general, people don't want somebody standing over their shoulder as you're going about your day-to-day work. So I would say that's a good tech lead is somebody that really puts the team first and the individual people really at the center of what they're doing, right? Because the team is the one that's doing the work. So first and foremost, they need to be the priority. On the other side, like a bad tech lead, I mean, you can say a bad tech lead is obviously someone that's not technically competent, but I think that that's not even what makes a bad tech lead, because even that can be overcome, I believe. What makes a bad tech lead, I believe, is somebody that's really in it for themselves, that their number one priority is how they look, their growth, trying to take credit for all the work, trying to instill as much control as they can over every little thing, and just kind of creating that environment maybe of fear rather than innovation and having that positive team spirit, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure. And this last question there. Let's say someone's just gone into their first tech lead job, either just been promoted in their current company or managed to land something at another company, and they've inherited a team. So they've not recruited that team, which is obviously always probably going to be preferred to have built out your own team. If you're someone that's inherited a team, like, what would be the best way to, I guess, start that journey of becoming like a new tech lead, and make sure you start off sort of on the right foot?
Yeah, good question, right? So it's obviously it can be a tough situation, an intimidating situation, right? You come into a team, maybe they're experts, maybe they're much smarter than you, and all of a sudden you're kind of like the boss, right? But there's some things you can definitely do consciously uh, to get off on the right foot. And what I mean here is that you really want that team buy-in, right? So the first thing you want to do is you want to establish trust. You want to earn the team's trust. This is first and foremost the most important thing, right? Now, the most effective way to do this is to give trust, right? And you can state this very clearly and saying, guys, like, I trust you to deliver your work. You have a certain sense of freedom here. I'm not going to stand over your shoulder, but I trust that you will deliver what you're supposed to, right? And this right away, just saying that right off the bat, already establishes a certain foundation, right? Where it's like, okay, yeah, I get it. This guy will let me have freedom. And like we said, it's a creative software development, it's a creative field. So allowing that sense of freedom can improve your mindset and allow you to work more effectively. At the same time, of course, you also want to establish yourself as a trustworthy person. You want to keep your promises, big and small, and of course, and do what you say. The second element that you want to do is you want to earn the team's respect. So it's still a technical job after all, and you need to demonstrate kind of your technical acumen in a sense, so that they understand, like, okay, yeah, this guy, they know what they're doing, right? Like, they're not just clueless and they're not like managers. So here you really want to, at the beginning, really want to look for opportunities where on topics where you can contribute to, where you can jump in, right? So you can really demonstrate your mantle. You can show the team that you can be in the trenches, that you were in the trenches, that you know what it's about, right? And kind of in this way, standing right next to them as you delve into problems, or you maybe facilitate an important technical decision with your input. This shows them that you got what it takes. You understand their world. So this is important. And I think the third element that you can really work on is integrity. So leading with integrity, as in leading by example, doing what you say. So, for example, if one of your team's core values is quality, right? You say, guys, everything we do, we have to do with quality. But then you yourself don't follow that same standard that you set for the team, like your Jira tickets, you kind of half-ass it. your task, you don't follow your own quality criteria, you don't have this test coverage, or you didn't pass all the required system tests before you commit your code, for example, right? Then all that goes out the window. Similarly, if you say, hey, we don't have any blame culture here, right? But then you publicly shame a team member for making a mistake, then those are just words. So if you establish these three things, like trust, respect, and integrity, then you're really developing a foundation from which you can build a high performance team, right? And you assert your influence over the team.
Amazing. Yeah, and I think the 2 points that stand out for me the most there is you said from a trust perspective, like there's nothing worse than a manager that says, "Oh, like I'll have this for you by this date or this time," and you just don't hear from them, or like the date keeps getting pushed back and pushed back and pushed back, like because you just don't feel like they're on your side or anything's really going to happen, and you
Yeah.
having to chase them when they give you a date, like is one of the worst things. And like you said, from an integrity perspective, I think you have to practice what you preach, right? I don't think you can expect people to do something that you're not willing to do yourself. So yeah, I'd say that's probably hands down one of the most important ones. So yeah, no, I really really appreciate your time, Alex. Appreciate you imparting some wisdom there. If anyone wants to get in touch with you off the back of this and kind of explore things further with you, what's the best place to reach out to you? Is it LinkedIn?
It's LinkedIn, and I recently launched my new website, so www.alexkliotzkin.com. So you can get in touch with me there or on LinkedIn. Yeah, both
Perfect.
are great. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll tag you in the link and I'll put your website on there as well. And I guess one final thing, obviously, people are coming to you for advice. There is there anyone that like either books you've read or like podcasts you've listened to or people that you've kind of like followed yourself that you would recommend other people checking out as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So my leadership Bible is a book called Compassionate Leadership by Manly Hopkinsons, where it really describes a lot of these topics that I just talked about: trust, integrity, respect, and really goes into great detail of how to establish a high performance team. It's not a technical book, but there's so many wonderful elements there that I've applied throughout my career. So that one I definitely recommend. And the other one would be The Manager's Path, right? That's a pretty popular one, but I think that book does a great job of really describing the journey from an engineer to tech lead to manager to director and so forth, and the different challenges along the way. And
Amazing.
as far as people, I mean, there's so many wonderful people on LinkedIn that I follow. But I think if we talk about tech lead and kind of this transitioning from IC to a leadership role, there's a few names that come off the top of my head. I know there's tons of great people. I don't want to miss anyone, but Animar Fisser, her whole thing is about helping people become tech leads. And there's Gregor Oystersek and Radu Susano, um, all on LinkedIn. So give them a follow. They really share wonderful content.
Yeah, we had Gregor on previously, and I've been messaging both the others about potentially coming on as well. So it seems like I've come to the right place, which is good. So, um,
Perfect.
Alex, really enjoyed speaking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time, and yeah, anyone who's listening, thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. It's been a pleasure.